The controversial Tavistock Gender Clinic has been closed down after an independent review said the clinic was not safe and was transitioning children without proper evaluation, giving children puberty blockers and hormones and surgery with irreversible side effects when the children aren't equipped to consent to such treatments because they're children. And some former patients, such as Kearse Bell, are now suing the NHS. Kearse Bell was prescribed puberty blockers aged just 16 and then received testosterone shots a year later, and aged 20 had a double mastectomy. Kearse has now detransitioned to her original gender, like many others who are treated by the Tavistock Clinic. Trans people exist and need to be respected and receive appropriate care and treatment. Nobody's disputing any of this, but care needs to be taken when dealing with children who claim to be trans. When I was a kid, I desperately wanted to be a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle because I'd seen a TV show called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It was super popular and it was everywhere. All the kids at school were talking about it. It seemed super cool. Looking back, though, there was some merit in me not being allowed to have a turtle shell irremovably grafted to my back. Staff at the Tavistock Clinic have raised concerns for a long time. 18 years ago, former Tavistock nurse Susan Evans spoke out after claiming to see a mentally distressed boy given hormone treatments to transition him after only 4 appointments. Other staff have spoken of children being rushed to medical treatment, that doctors were converting gay children into thinking that they were trans, and medics were failing to consider other mental health issues. Anyone who presented with anything resembling gender dysphoria was funneled into transitioning with puberty blockers, hormones and surgery, and workers saw a gender ideology enforced rigidly where anyone who questioned treatment was ostracised by other staff. Concerned parents and patients were told that the treatments were benign and necessary. Don't worry, puberty blockers just delay puberty. If you decide not to transition, you can stop them later and continue with a natural puberty. But apparently, this rarely happened. Once you're on the conveyor belt to transition, most patients continued on to transitioning hormones and then surgery. And the treatment isn't benign. Puberty blockers and hormones result in lifelong changes, including osteoporosis and infertility, and surgery can be even more drastic. Mastectomies and hysterectomies can't be reversed, and Kearse Bell, one of the patients treated, has been told that she will not be able to breastfeed her children. And in most cases, puberty resolves the issue and confused children revert to their natal gender. Obviously, some people are trans and need to transition, but it's not the default situation for any child who presents with gender confusion. Gender is confusing. Even for me, and I'm 46, there are 478 recognised genders now. I grew up in the 80s. We had 2 genders and 4 TV channels, and we needed 2 TV guides just for those. There's been a huge increase in children transitioning. The number of children referred for gender treatment in the UK rose from 97 to 2,519 in just 8 years. That's a rise of 9,000% probably. I haven't worked it out. And the people accessing the service changed from mostly males transitioning to women to mainly teenage girls transitioning to men. It became a social contagion, just as fads for eating disorders or self-harming can go around teenage peer groups fueled by society's invasive sexualisation of young women, which we'll be doing later on the show, by the way. Stay tuned for that. Which sometimes makes young women want to desexualise themselves, to give themselves some protection from prying eyes. And there's also the media's constant elevation of alternative genders and sexualities, and the bashing of normal or cisgenders and sexualities is unfavourable. A former patient of the Tavistock Clinic describes this happening in her teenage years in a revealing article in today's Telegraph. As I explored my sexuality, I concluded that I was probably bisexual rather than gay. But some of my new friends were disappointed by my conclusion. They told me I was trapped in an oppressive society designed for the supremacy of men. Bisexuals were sellouts, next door to straight, and straightness was a tool of the patriarchy. Every way I turned, I seemed to be in imminent danger of exploitation, sexual or otherwise. I wanted out. Suicide regularly came to mind as an option. This is when gender ideology came onto the scene. With each step, the promise grew of freedom from the social sexual tyranny in which my womanly body had me trapped. I was being offered an escape that didn't involve death. I was only too happy to do and say whatever was asked of me by those offering the way out. What had started as a denial by others of my bisexuality had become a denial of my femininity, then of my being female. Going by they, them pronouns, I was making myself look ugly on purpose because I didn't want the sexual attention of those evil, tyrannical men. She speaks of therapists suggesting she's a man, her transitioning and feeling incredibly unhappy. But when she raised it with therapists, being browbeaten back onto the pathway of transitioning. Finally, when she elected for surgery to remove female organs, her GP pushed back and she ended up detransitioning. Detransitioning wasn't the end of her ordeal. She'd lost her career and all her friends who saw her as abandoning gender ideology with its narratives of patriarchy, toxic masculinity and cis-normativity. Now this report by Dr. Hilary Cass has blown open the Tavistock secrets and revealed the safety issues. It says there was a lack of understanding about why the type of patients the clinic was seeing was changing, with more female to male patients and more autistic children. Dr. Cass also highlighted inconclusive evidence to back some of the clinical decision-making. Health staff felt under pressure to adopt an unquestioning affirmative approach. Once patients are identified as having gender-related distress, other healthcare issues they had, such as being neurodivergent, are overlooked. The Tavistock isn't an isolated case. We're seeing a creep of adult sexualisation into children's lives, with drag queen story hour rolling out across the country, school teachers oversharing their sexual exploits. The Arts Council even funded naked sex shows for children. These shows were pulled after protests, which were decried in The Guardian as far-right. Man, those protesters weren't Nazis. They were Mumsnet. What sort of a time are we living in when being opposed to paedophilia is considered far-right? The message from gender ideologues is that children can consent to having puberty blockers and hormones and surgical treatments, which raises the question, if they can consent to that, what else is it being suggested that they can consent to? And why would you want to stop someone's puberty? Are you trying to keep them as children until they're old enough to consent legally? Let's hope this scandal stops at medical malpractice. The Tavistock debacle is developing into one of the biggest medical scandals of our time, and it's only going to get worse as more and more young people who regret their transitions come forward. Let's learn the lessons and offer more support to confused children.